The sophomore effort from Anvil might be a classic for its title track alone, but it's also a much heavier and overall better record than their debut effort, and it should have gained them the attention they ultimately deserved. So, what happened? So let's talk about the good stuff first. Given the year of release and what's on the record, Anvil is likely one of the earliest precursors to what would be called thrash metal. The band had taken their influences, Judas Priest, Rush, and Triumph, to name a few, and simply turned up the power and speed. And a lot of notable metal acts to follow openly cite this Canadian band as an influence on them, such as Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. Metal on Metal was produced and engineered by Chris Tangarides, who would later work on some notable albums from Y&T, King Diamond, and most notably, Judas Priest. Standout tracks include Mothra, March of the Crabs, and, of course, the title track to Metal on Metal. A music video was made for the title track of the album, showing the band in a recording studio performance. But to get a real sense of both the track and the band, I'd much rather recommend their 1984 live performance from Japan, found on the Unidisc Music YouTube channel. It's Anvil doing what they clearly do best. What's strange is that you might think this would be the album that would break them big, but it really wasn't. The culprit was likely a combination of bad timing and bad label deals. Although Aerosmith manager David Krebs signed a managing contract with Anvil following this album and promised to shop them to the majors on the strength of their first few albums, Attic Records refused to release or license out the material. So Krebs pulled out of the deal, and the band struggled to find a major label deal going forward. As for bad timing, the resulting bitterness was certainly well publicized. The fact that Metallica drummer Lars Ulrich said his band would one day be bigger than Anvil, and then was, along with other fledgling thrash bands, had Anvil responding in the media with a whole lot of resentment. But what do you think? Do you think Anvil deserved more, or do you think they simply got left behind by better and faster bands? Let me know in the comments below. For more on Anvil's history and their hard road to whatever it is they are, check out the 2009 documentary called Anvil, The Story of Anvil. Although not a lot of vinyl reissues for this album, there was a 2019 edition put out by Attic Records Limited, if interested. To be honest here, Anvil's story is basically that of the underdog. And while some of the tracks on this record are admittedly a little weak, there's also some very strong material here that makes up for that. If you haven't heard this album, you are encouraged to do so. The speed metal band known as Razor has a firm reputation as being a beloved Canadian metal act. And while future albums support this status, their second album might have some trouble living up to all of that. Evil Invaders was produced by Walter Zwall, whose previous work was for the relatively unknown Christian metal band Blind Vengeance. Zwall would go on to produce Razor's follow-up album, Malicious Intent, but very little after that. Notable tracks would have to be Iron Hammer, Tortured Skull, and Cutthroat. Although the drums are a bit weak and production is fairly questionable, the riffs are decent and occasionally memorable. I also wouldn't have opened the album with a 4-minute instrumental that is serviceable at best and certainly not a particularly strong track itself. However, what's clear about this record is that it really does have a strong cult following amongst some fans of classic speed and thrash metal. Can't deny that. Razor is considered part of the Big Four of Canadian thrash, alongside Sacrifice, Voivod, and Annihilator. However, if this were the only Razor album I'd heard, I'd be pretty confused about that inclusion. Their songwriting and production pick up quite a bit on future releases, including the much-loved Violent Restitution album. But Razor as part of the Canadian Big Four is akin to Tankard being in the Teutonic Big Four. Both seem comparatively out of their league. As for the former, I'd bump Razor for Exciter. But maybe that's just me. Let me know in the comments how you feel about those inclusions. In promotion for this album, a music video was released for the title track. According to the band's biography on their official Facebook account, this might be the very first speed metal music video ever recorded. Given the overlap of both speed and thrash metal, there might be a contender to that claim with Anthrax's Madhouse video. Not sure how the timelines for both line up, but it's possible that Razor was indeed first. The most recent vinyl reissue of Evil Invaders is a 2019 edition on Hammerheart Records, released on red vinyl and limited to 200 copies. As for more recent news, Razor has announced that a new album is expected in 2020, the first studio record from the band in over 20 years. Following on the heels of other lo-fi debut efforts from the likes of bands like Possessed and Voivod, Canadian thrashers Sacrifice show that there's more to making a memorable metal album than mere production value. After locally shopping a series of rehearsal tapes, which included early versions of Turn in Your Grave and Warriors of Death, the band recorded a demo called The Exorcism in June of 1985. All of this, along with an opening gig for Exodus, led to Sacrifice being signed by Fringe Records to their imprint label Diabolic Force, for whom they recorded their debut album in the fall of 1985. And I'm going to state this up front, the production on Torment and Fire is pretty awful. Not unlistenable awful, but definitely awful. The album was produced by Toronto record store employee, punk singer, and DJ Brian Taylor. This was some of Taylor's earliest production as well, so that might explain the quality here. But he would go on to produce the next two Sacrifice albums, which have markedly improved production quality. Taylor also produced albums for fellow Canadians Slaughter and Razor. Plenty of killer tracks on this one, including Burned at the Stake, Homicidal Breath, and my favorite, Turn in Your Grave.
Darkness around you, there is no escape. As I touch you, your mind is full of hate. By the force of evil, you are my slave. Turn in your grave.
It's clear that Sacrifice aren't performing straight thrash here, but also seem somewhat influenced by early and even proto-death metal bands to a degree. Likely Possessed and Venom, and maybe a little Bathory as well. This might lead some to believe that the sound on Torment and Fire isn't merely bad production, but also an emulation of their influences' recorded efforts. After all, they were teenagers when they made this album. Regardless, what do you think about Torment and Fire? Let me know in the comments below. Vinyl reissues for Torment and Fire really didn't start to appear until the 2010s. Most notable is the 2017 reissue from Canada's War on Music label, with vinyl variants in black, 500 copies, red, 400 copies, and clear splatter, 100 copies. According to the band's Twitter feed, Sacrifice are working on new material as of December 2019 in preparation for a new album. No release date, as of yet. Exciter's first album is a brutal speed metal assault that brings a lot of thrash into the mix as well, but doesn't measure up to the landmark thrash releases later that year, or perhaps even exceed them. Maybe. Formed in Ottawa, Canada by vocalist and drummer Dan Beeler, guitarist John Ricci, and bassist Alan Johnson, the band started out as Hellraiser, but then changed their name to Exciter in 1980. Likely attributing the Judas Priest song of the same name. After recording their World War III demo, they shopped it to Shrapnel Records, who in turn put the track on Volume 2 of their US Metal compilation in 1982. Yes, a Canadian band on a comp named US Metal. Anywho, that same year, Exciter officially signed to the label and released their debut album. Some of the fussier listeners out there might take issue with the production on this record, but I don't see it as a problem. If anything, it adds to the overall sound of Heavy Metal Maniac, even to the point of making it more metal. Quite frankly, I wouldn't want this record any other way. Many standout tracks on this amazing album, including Iron Dogs, Under Attack, and Stand Up and Fight. With hindsight being 2020, the real shame about this record is in its timing. Although it came out many months before Kill 'Em All and Show No Mercy, Shrapnel Records didn't have the resources to put the band on the road right away, not to mention some distribution problems. So most people discovered Exciter the following year, after which Metallica and Slayer had already gained a foothold in the genre. If circumstances panned out differently, Exciter would have no doubt gotten a lot more recognition than they did. The most recent vinyl reissue of Heavy Metal Maniac is the 2008 edition from Megaforce on either red-black splatter or red-black and white splatter, each variant at 500 copies released. As for more recent news, the band stated in a March 2020 interview that they were shopping a new demo, looking to secure a deal, and hope to record an album soon. And the new album will include John Ricci's replacement, Daniel Decay, who's been in the band since late 2018. If you're wanting to listen to some metal history, this album is an important chapter in that story. And also, check out their following album, Violence and Force, a worthy album in its own right. The video you just watched was a compilation of clips from the Vinyl Reacquisition Project, a program available on the Accusation Network YouTube channel. Make sure to check out all of my shows on the subjects of metal vinyl collecting, as well as classic and modern metal bands in general. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out the full episodes of the show. And of course, like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching.